condemned or feel pretty well loved? Very good. So that's the first question. All of that is one question. So, anybody have anything that's jumping right out of them that they'd like to say about that? Larry?
He would allow me to follow him so I could learn from him.
He'd let you follow? Okay. Probably not too far of a distance either. So that's good. Yeah, Justin?
I think that I would probably feel all of the things that you mentioned, but what I would want to hear is that that I really was accepted, and that I really was okay in his eyes. Just that reassurance. I think if I had one conversation with him, that would probably be what I would want to hear.
That's good. Some reassurance. I can definitely understand that. Alexis?
If he heard me talking, I would want him to be like, hey, that's something I'd say. You know, I would want him to be like, hey, you look like me, or hey, you're acting like me, you know.
I like that. Taking the words out of his mouth, that'd be great. So if Jesus were here, what would you hope that he would say to you? How would he hope that he treated you? And possibly what would you feel? That leads into our second question tonight, which is how do you treat other people? Do you think other people feel judged, maybe a little condemned? Or do they feel pretty well loved? So, second question, how do you treat other people? So I think that's a fair question we should be asking ourselves is, if I would want Jesus to treat me this way, how am I treating other people? So we can turn to Matthew chapter 7 tonight. You know, whenever there's a major change in your life, you know, you're doing a new diet, you're doing a new exercise regimen, trying something new. I'm trying this juicing cleanse. We talked a little bit last night about soul detox. Whenever it seems like there's a major life change, it kind of sets you apart from those around you a little bit. Because usually when you're with a group, you kind of tend to act the same, be the same. So if you're doing something different, it kind of sets you apart a little bit. And this was a big thing when CrossFit first came out. It's like there was a running joke. Same with veganism is like, how do you know if somebody does CrossFit? They'll tell you that they do CrossFit. And the same with veganism. It's like, how do you know they're vegan? They'll tell you that you're a vegan. And so I think that can almost kind of get like, oh, you know, they'll let you know that they're doing something better than you. And I want to think, does this happen to us as Christians? It's like, how do you know they're a Christian? They'll let you know. And that can be either a good thing or a bad thing. A good thing is that, you know where people know where you stand. A bad thing can be, oh, they think they're up here, and the rest of us are just down here. And I think that's the vibe that people tend more so to get. Is like, oh yeah, we're just the low untouchables down here, and they're the upper class, morally superior Christians. But in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, it says, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. So as I was reading and studying for this class and looking at how Jesus interacted with those around him, I didn't see anywhere that Jesus asked people or looked too much at them with a judgmental view. He definitely knew where they were coming from. But he didn't say, why are you lame, or why are you not working? He didn't say that. What he did say was, do you want to be well? Do you want things to change? So looking at the first and second questions, if Jesus were here, what would he hope to say to you? Or what would you like to be treated by Jesus? And the second question is, how do you treat others? And the reason I'm asking these questions is, do people see Jesus when they see you? In your life and how you treat others? Is it more of a judgmental attitude? Is it feeling loved? Is it maybe just cutting them off entirely? We had talked a little bit in Bill's class how he had mentioned legalism and different things in society can kind of bleed into the church. You know, we're in society as well, so some of that can bleed into the church and how we live our lives. And I think that a danger, especially in America and just with the way things are currently with the media attention, we really focus on appearances and looks, and we can get a little prideful, I think, bleeding into the church. You know, how we see others, you know, or how we look at others. Whether we dress better, we make more, we're more successful, we act better, we do the rules that we see written in this book here when other people don't. So that's the main thing I want to challenge us with tonight, is to, if you didn't like how you answered the second question with how you treat other people, it could be a pride issue. Does anybody know what the Bible has to say about pride? I know there's a lot of verses on it. Is it something that has positive connotations to it? Justin?
The verse that jumps out in my mind is the one that says, and I'm drawing a blank as to where it is, I think it's James, that God sets himself up in battle against the proud.
All right.
So
God sets himself against it. Yeah. Alexis?
Proverbs 16:18 and 19. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Better to be lowly in spirit along with the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud.
All right.
And there's another verse in Psalms or something, I think, where it says God hates pride.
All right.
Like he hates it.
I think that's earlier in Proverbs, actually. Well, it might be in Proverbs or Psalms as well, but I know it's specifically in Proverbs 6 as well. We'll probably read that if somebody doesn't mention that. But yeah, pride comes before a fall. And the danger with that is that you don't necessarily see it coming. You know, I don't think anybody sees a gaping hole or a misstep ahead of them and doesn't avoid it. So I think the danger with pride is that you might not always see it coming. It's kind of an insidious thing that can kind of just creep up. In Proverbs 6, verse 17, or we'll start in 16, it says, "These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him." And it goes right into verse 17, "A proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood." So, like Alexis was saying there, the devil, God hates a proud look or a haughty eyes looking down on others. And I think it must have been a lot for Jesus to restrain himself, seeing the religious body in the day that was putting down others and looking only down on them. And, for Jesus to come and to not even sin, even in the midst of all of that, and being angry and having righteous anger, I give a lot of props to him for that. Justin, did you have something? No, okay. Just an eye. In Psalms chapter 10, I'll read next. Psalms chapter 10, verse 2 says, "The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots which they've devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts." So it's talking about being prideful. It's talking about the wicked being prideful, persecuting the poor, as well as in their proud countenance does not seek God. And God is in none of his thoughts. So, and I can see where that verse, what that's talking about. You know, when you're only looking down on somebody, it's not about they're a creation, you know, that God created them specially or anything like that. It's just me and them. It's just a comparison. Larry?
In Proverbs 8, verse 30, no, Proverbs 8, 13, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance, and the evil way, and the perverse mouth I hate. God hates it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's definitely true. And he doesn't use, you know, soft language with that either. You know, it's an abomination. It's something that is hateful. Sorry, I had a quote here. I'll have to look it up again. That's all right. Yeah, I'll see if I can get that. I think it's easy to ask, and I see it a lot at work. I see a lot of people that are in bad situations, and it's a lot of it is what got them there. You know, there's always a big argument about drug addiction, whether it's a disease or a choice. And from my experience and what I've seen, I think initially it is a choice. I think at least the first maybe a couple of times, probably a good choice. But then your brain does kind of get rewired and becomes quite the addiction. And there's talk of free will at that point, whether, you know, your body's craving something or you're choosing to feel something or not. But we can get that kind of opinion with people. It's like, oh, well, you know, you're poor because you had a kid out of wedlock. You're not married, and then you guys split, or you don't want to work, so you're poor. And not just only about poor things. Maybe you're in bad health because, you know, that's just you not taking care of yourself or doing bad things like drugs and smoking. So, but when I'm reading Jesus' interactions, it's not so much about what got them there, but what can get them out. And Jesus was the answer for a lot of those. He did healings. But there was one thing that kept coming up, that when Jesus saw people, he had compassion on them. It was written a few times. We'll read one specifically in Matthew chapter 9 real quick. I'm right there already. Matthew 9, and I'd seen this a few times, verse 36. It's a small phrase, short phrase, but it says in verse 36, but when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered, like sheep having no shepherd. And then he says to his disciples, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And there's a few other times where Jesus saw them and he was moved with compassion. And it leads to another question. When was the last time, and for some of it may be very recent, that you saw and were moved with compassion? Is that something that people could use to describe you, do you think? And if we do have pride bleeding into the church, then how do we avoid this as Christians? And I'll open this one up. You know, how do we avoid this as Christians if we find pride in the church or we're seeing it? Because pride can be one of those sticky subjects where you kind of see it on somebody else and you're like, oh, they're bad, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, you've got it. So how do we kind of approach that in a way that's with truth and grace? Anybody have any thoughts on that? What I had thought, oh, Bill, sorry.
For a lot of these, it's very difficult to just stop. You have to replace it, right? You create a vacuum, and something's going to fill it. And if you're trying to stop being prideful in your own walk, right, then you need to fill it with with something else, right? And what you see in the letters to the churches are reminders of grace, the grace of Christ and his sacrifice, and then pride in the bride. And so you see Paul mention having pride in different churches or in ministries. And so it's not a personal pride or a pride of my work, it's a pride of Christ and his work. And yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Justin?
So it's going to sound like I'm going to be minimizing obedience, but I'm not. I think that in my experience in the church, that when pride and judgment, which go together, are present, it's a lack of understanding of grace. And it's usually coupled with the feeling that we have made ourselves holy and we have made ourselves good. And so when you say that, it's usually met with resistance, because people will say, but what about obedience, and what about, which is true, we still are supposed to be obedient, but grace and the fact that we're saved by him and it's nothing that we've done can coincide with the fact that you need to be obedient. But when we realize that without Jesus we really are nothing, then all of a sudden judgment of others disappears, and now you want to join them in their journey to truth and grace. And it seems that when we don't really have an understanding of grace and the fact that there's nothing we can do to truly save ourselves, that we're at risk of pride and judging other people. And that's when you hear statements like, I can't believe they did XYZ. Well, if you understand sin and you understand humanity, it's easy to understand how they ended up there.
Yeah.
So.
Very good. Thank you. Oh, Uncle Jim?
As you were talking, it made me think of the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And what it says there in Luke 18 and verse 9, it says, also as he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. So that, I think, is a good definition of pride. They trusted in themselves. The things that they trusted in were religious acts that they did. It said 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. So he's comparing himself to others, and too often we do that. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So I think the lesson there is be careful about being confident in the things that you do, religious things that you do, I guess, and comparing ourselves to other people. When we compare ourselves to God, we're more like the tax collector who says, be merciful to me, I'm a sinner. I think of Peter when he realized who Jesus was. He says, get away from me. I'm a man of unclean lips.
No, that's well said. Thank you. Yeah, and even with that, I think, as you go in your Christian life, it's not so much a matter of even time really changing any of that. Because if you're always comparing yourself to the same, you're never, to Jesus or to God, you're never going to measure up. So it's not like, as you become a Christian for longer and longer, you're going to be, more prideful and more prideful, when really it should just be the same, or more humble as you grow. So yeah, very good. Very good. And with Jesus, it was fascinating because, Jesus didn't even only help those that were thankful for it. he didn't only help those who did what he said, because he would heal somebody and say, all right, don't tell anybody. And immediately they would just go tell everybody. So it wasn't a conditional thing. And I want to look at one case here in John 5. And in John chapter 5, it was an interesting case, one that hadn't stuck out to me in the past, but for some reason this time as I was reading it just seemed to stick out, just because it seems like an interesting interaction. All right, so we'll start in chapter 5, and this is talking, I don't know if anybody knows about the pool of Bethesda there. It says in verse 1, it says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. And you can imagine, at any time in human history, this would be a popular pool. It says, now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years, which is 9 years longer than I've been alive. It says, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there in that condition a long time, he said, do you want to be made well? The sick man answered and said, sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. So that's an interesting question that Jesus throws at him. He's like, hey, do you want to be well? You would think in his condition and the length of time he had spent there, it was almost Jesus like saying, hey, do you really want to get out of here? You've been here a long time. And the sick man answered, he didn't say yes, right away, like, of course. He just says, no, nobody else is here to do it. Nobody else is here to help me. And Jesus said to him, rise and take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked, and that day was the Sabbath. And then it goes on to talk about the Jews said, whoa, what's going on? It's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to carry your bed. That was their main concern on the Sabbath, was this man carrying his bed. So that is too much to carry. But it's interesting. It doesn't say that the guy thanked Jesus, that he went off proclaiming Jesus. It just said he took his bed and he left. So it's interesting to me that Jesus has compassion on this man and heals him, and there's no like, oh, thank you, no praising, at least that we can read right here. It's just he got up and left. And then they asked him, who said to you, in verse 12, take up your bed and walk? But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. So he doesn't even know how he got there, who healed him. He just finds himself like, I don't even know who that was. But that was just, after 38 years. So it's easy to kind of bash this guy and be like, wow, you're kind of ungrateful. You don't really know. But I can see myself in his shoes where it's like, wow, like you're in a good spot. You've been healed. And do you have a relationship with Jesus? Or did you just kind of be healed and walk away? I think that's something we can challenge ourselves with is, one, do we really have that relationship with Jesus? And are we thankful for what we've been given? And it's interesting a little bit later on that Jesus even seeks him out again in verse 14, which to me I was kind of baffled. It says, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. And then it says, then the man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. So Jesus here doing a good deed, healing the man. The guy doesn't know where he was because Jesus slipped away, or who he was. Didn't seem too thankful, didn't seem, praising Jesus. And then immediately sells him out to the Jews who want to kill him. But it's an interesting statement. It says, "See, you have been made well, sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." And as I was studying really what that meant, was it more like, oh, you've been healed, if you don't stop sinning, a worse calamity, a physical calamity is going to come upon you? Or is it spiritual healing, that a worse calamity may come upon you if you don't stop the way you're going? So from the outside looking in, it's easy for us to kind of look at this and say, oh, this guy was a bum, that didn't ever want to make it down to the pool. Jesus asked him if he wanted to be healed. He gave an excuse, saying, oh, nobody else can help me to the pool. And then he's immediately healed and says, sells out the guy who helps him. It's like, did he really want to be healed in the first place? But I think we can all have a little bit of that, where it's like, do we want to be healed? Do we want to have a relationship with Jesus? Or do we just want to be healed from our physical ailment and kind of move on our way and have a good life? So I appreciate, the verses that we have of talking about pride, and like what my Uncle Jim was saying, and Justin and Bill and everybody that shared, saying, it really comes as a comparison. With pride, it's always about where am I at with the people around me. And people say if you want to make a big life change, you really have to move to a different area. You've got to get, a lot of times we can be like crabs in a bucket, where we're just trying to pull the one that's trying to climb out back down. I've heard that analogy. And it can be that way, but it can also be, as a church body, we can really encourage one another to lift everybody up. We can challenge one another, say, hey, maybe we're doing something, and maybe the person that we're helping out isn't even really thankful that much. But it's not necessarily about them. It's about us doing what we're called to do and giving. The person might not even say, I don't know where I got these clothes. I went to this building over on that street by the park, and there's clothes there, and so it's not that even that it's for our praise or glory, because it's not. But it's so that we can be like Jesus, like it says in Romans, transforming our minds. We don't want to be having the culture bleeding into the church where we're just growing in pride and not really helping out the community. So, and I'm really encouraged by small groups to see, when we're really connecting on a deeper level. It's hard if we only do Sundays to really have deep discussions, and even in the classes on Sunday mornings, which have been good, just to have like even more open discussion than that. So as we go into small groups and we start this new kind of chapter here, I just want to encourage everybody to really challenge each other, challenge ourselves. Like, why are we doing the things we're doing? Is it so that we can get that thanks, get that the glory for the church here? Yeah, we're doing really well. Or is it so that we can be more like Jesus and encourage others to be more like Jesus? So, does anybody have anything they'd like to add or say? Or any questions, Nancy?
Noticed it or not, it was a man sitting on the street with a mirror with a bucket, and it had another guy looking at himself when he went to give him money. Treat others as you would treat yourself, and think about others.
Yeah, well, that's good. I like that. And that's why I like to start out the question. It's fascinating to read the interactions that Jesus had, and it's like, man, I wonder what it would have been like, just walking around and like, oh, that's Jesus, let's go see if we can talk to him. And I'm sure that's why there was always multitudes, and Jesus had to pull himself away. But when he saw people, he had compassion on them. He wanted to help them out. And for him, it was, it's their sin that he was going to deal with. But there's a lot of stories where he helped their physical ailments too. So we get the benefits of the spiritual, salvation, which we can see in hindsight. So. All right, anybody else? Alexis?
I
think Jesus was, out of anybody in this whole world, he had every right to be prideful. You know,
Right.
he's Jesus. He could have been like, I'm God, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't. He was the most compassionate person, you know? So who are we to be like, oh, I'm not going to serve you because you're unthankful? You know, it's like Jesus died for us, even though we're ungrateful, you know? He gave his whole life for us, for the most ungrateful people, you know? So we should be that way. We should be like, giving our lives to people who are not grateful and who we're not going to get credit from it, you know? Because we got to be like Jesus.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, he was perfect. So if anybody could have been prideful, it would have been Jesus. So that's good. All right, well, thanks, guys, for your participation. Hopefully it'll be something you can talk about in your homes and encourage one another. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this time that you've blessed us with to be together and encourage one another. And I just pray that we can have wisdom and just that we can attain that from your word and from your Holy Spirit just guiding us. And I'm thankful that we have one another, we have this body to really help each other, build each other up, and that we can be a light in this community. Help us to not be prideful and really compare ourselves to others, but look to Jesus and his example, his perfect example that is, and that we can just show grace to those around us, and that we can be more in line with your will. And I just pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you.